size had recently been introduced. And learner drivers were trying to handle 2 wheels rather than 4. Nottingham's trams again today, but the view is somewhat different to that of Mitchell and Kenyon's film shot in August 1902. It's a busy lunchtime in the city centre. On the left, we can see one of the more recent additions to metropolitan life. Dining rooms for the city workers who didn't have time to go home for lunch. The extraordinary thing is that the citizens of Nottingham have not changed much, but they are subtly different. All the men wear hats, most have moustaches, and all the women are wearing long skirts. People lived in the street much more. They had to because many of their houses were so cramped. But they possessed the pavement and the road much more. Without cars dominating the streets, they simply strolled around. You get that sense from these films, don't you? People wandering quite happily up and down the streets. It's a real part of their life, a more pleasant place to be. People are much the same, but the individuality of Nottingham 100 years ago has sadly been diminished by corporate blandness that many city centres have these days. It's the small details in these films that are so striking, like street furniture, lovely cast iron street lamps and great gas lanterns, wonderful features we now rarely see. Much of Nottingham has been redeveloped since Mitchell and Kenyon's films were shot. But some parts of the Edwardian city still remain, if you look hard enough. For most factory workers, the novelty of new electric trams, exotic shopping opportunities, and the glimpse of a motor car were by the by. They were caught up in the day-to-day drudgery of hard manual work. Skilled workers' unions had existed for 50 years, but for unskilled men, as at Platt's engineering works, there was no one to represent their welfare. One of the foundry men working there was Fred Fallows. We put an article in the Oldham Advertiser and found his grandson, Trevor.
My grandfather, Fred Fallows, worked at Platt Brothers, and it was a dreadful place to work in. Well, it's interesting that none of them are smiling. But look at the number of people that used to work there. Incredible. The working conditions that those men used to work in were absolutely appalling. The noise, the heat, was quite deafening. The atmosphere must have been unbearable. My grandfather was exactly like these, probably like one with the dirty face, because his job was a very dirty, filthy job, and it made him very thirsty as well. And it's quite interesting to note a man stood at the gates there that looks as if he's selling beer. He probably came from Oldham Brewery, less than half a mile away. You can see him pulling the pint. When they came out of the foundry, they would be very thirsty indeed. Some of them could probably drink 20 pints comfortably. Not an exaggeration. think grandfather was one of those as well. Because conditions were so bad, there was a lot of injury because they were carrying these iron bars and they would drop them and break their toes, and they would still have to work with a broken toe or a finger. There was quite a lot of amputations, fingers and so on and so forth. And my grandfather, Fred, thought that he would try and improve those conditions, that he would try and set up a representative body, like the early formation of a union, so that he could get a voice to try to improve the working conditions and pay for his fellow workers. And he actually created this union and was secretary of the union. But the management frowned upon it as an infringement of their rights to employ people and to increase the pay, which some of them deservedly earned. In fact, my grandfather, Fred, only earned 7 shillings and 11 when he was a working married man a week, which is very minimal even by those standards. People were reluctant to join the union because they felt that it would prejudice their chances of work, and if they were complaining and grumbling, then they were easily replaceable. I don't think they got him anywhere. In fact, generally speaking, I would say that it hindered his promotion chances. In fact, he was a moulder 56 years of his life. For his troubles and efforts, he received a silver ashtray, which seemed a very minimal retirement present. I would think today it's probably only worth about £10 scrap value, but of course it's of great sentimental value to me, and it's a great reminder of the hard life that he endured all his time.
Sunday was the only day of rest and relaxation for workers like Fred, and single men and women lived very separate lives. So Sunday constitutionals offered one of the few opportunities for meeting members of the opposite sex.
Fred met my grandmother Gertrude by walking out on Sunday. Most of the women would walk about, linking arms, just generally talking, and eventually she cast eyes on Fred, and Fred cast eyes on Gertrude, and they courted for 2 years and got married. Fairly young. I think Fred was 23 and Gertrude was 22.
With little else to entertain themselves, the arrival of a fair in town would have been a big event for young people like Fred and Gertrude. The cinemas hadn't been built yet, so they'd pay to see themselves on film at the travelling cinematograph show. At fairgrounds, the showman presented the films alongside freak shows and coconut shies. Others were based in towns and cities, showing films in town halls or music halls. The showmen were larger-than-life characters and great self-publicists, plastering towns with adverts and posters. They were also highly competitive, promoting themselves as well as the films they were screening. Their showmanship was a big part of the attraction for the crowd. The films were often shown in a 2-hour programme made up of a drama, a comedy, a live act or two, and the main attraction, the local topicals. People were fascinated with seeing themselves and their town, and the adverts proclaimed, "Nothing is so great a draw as a local subject." The image we have of the films accompanied by a tinkly piano couldn't be further from the truth. More often they'd have a brass band to provide the soundtrack. The showmen would provide their own highly dramatic running commentaries. Many of them even planted people in the crowd who were paid to shout out and faint when they saw themselves or their friends on screen. Anything for a bit of drama. It's all about spectacle, and spectacle paid. In the 1900s, the audiences would go to see themselves. Today, we can learn all sorts of details about them when we watch the films.